Welcome back. All right, so I haven't done a 32 team video in a while. I also haven't talked about players that I feel are underrated lately either. And I do like to take a look at players that I feel like are having underrated seasons or just are generally underrated players and going through all 32 teams and picking one player from each team. Some teams it was hard to find a player that I think is actually underrated, and some teams it was hard to just stop at one. Where I was like, well, a lot of these players are underrated, but I'll pick one. So we start with Calgary, we end with Vancouver, in between everybody else. So if you're a Canuck fan, apologies. Ended up last. It's a random order. We'll start with Calgary. In the Calgary spot, I might as well write the whole name. Connor Zary. So Connor Zary is not going to end up winning the Calder Trophy, but he's a very smart player. He's all over the place on that ice. Really, it feels like they spent the right amount of time developing him. And so this is why you don't just declare guys busts when they don't come up right away. This is why sometimes patience is a virtue. And in the case of the Calgary Flames, I think Zary's been fantastic. One of the main reasons that they've stayed in the hunt is the play of youngsters like Pospisil and like Zary. And so, I think he's been underrated. For St. Louis was a tough one. Honorable mention to Jordan Binnington, who is having a very good season. And I think for most Blues fans, that's where they go. But I've got to go with an old favorite, Colton Parayko. Colton Parayko's had some up and down seasons. This year, he's back on the up. And I've seen a lot of praise of Parayko. I don't know if I've seen as much praise of Parayko this year as I saw people not really being happy with Parayko last year. I think the post totals have been less when it comes to the praise. But yeah, Parayko's played quite well for them. The blue line is much maligned with St. Louis, and I get it, but yeah, Parayko's been quite strong, I think, throughout the season. Again, you guys can let me know your thoughts when it comes to who you feel like is underrated on each team. For Montreal, Montreal wasn't all that easy. I will say that there are a number of defensemen I could have gone with. I'm going with Juraj Slafkovsky. His play lately has been nothing short of stellar. When they drafted him first overall, it was a bit of an eyebrow-raising experience for us fans, but I think he's turned out to be a very good pick for them. And now he's up around a point per game over the last month. He's playing top minutes, and he doesn't look out of place doing it. So while Montreal's still going through the rebuild, Slafkovsky seems to have been a smart pick. And I would think that next year we may see Slafkovsky have the kind of bump in point totals that we've seen from Quentin Byfield this year with the LA Kings. So, yeah, I think Slav's been pretty good. For Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh's kind of tricky because there are so many really well-known name players there, but I'm going to go with Marcus Pettersson. Defenseman who can kind of do a little bit of everything. He had a rough night last night in Vancouver where two of the pucks kind of deflected in off of him into his net, but Pettersson's been quite good throughout the year. And I would say of the Pittsburgh Penguin players, he is probably the most underrated. And again, you guys can let me know your thoughts. But I figured Marcus Pettersson was the most obvious one to me from Pittsburgh, where I might have had Brian Rust in previous seasons, but we know what Rust can do. So, yeah, I'm going with Pettersson. Minnesota. For Minnesota, another defenseman here. Jonas Brodin. Jonas Brodin has been red hot lately, but honestly, it just underscores what's been quite a good year for him. Jared Spurgeon's missed a lot of action. They really missed Jared Spurgeon as well. But when Brodin came back, I think that's part of the reason why we've seen quite a resurgence from the Minnesota Wild. I don't think that's a coincidence. Brodin has missed time with injury, as a lot of players have in Minnesota this year. But when he's healthy and he's on, he is one of the more, I think, underrated defensemen in the National Hockey League. And again, over the last couple of weeks, he's shown he can put the puck in the net as well. He may be one of those defensemen who sacrifices some points for his defensive game. That's definitely something that we've seen with defensive defensemen before. We see that with defensive forwards too, where they maybe get a little bit less in the statistical department because they're more defensively conscientious. All right, Anaheim. Anaheim wasn't difficult. So, full disclosure, when we had the meetup in Anaheim, the stick I was using was a Radko Gudas stick, which was odd. It was odd because A, it's a little bit tall for me, just a little bit, and B, just using a stick and thinking this is a stick that's been used by a National Hockey League player. But Radko Gudas, to his credit, has had a really strong season in Anaheim after signing a contract there that kind of caught us off guard, right? He's provided veteran leadership on that blue line. His offensive numbers are never going to be anything to write home about, of course, but he gives them the physicality. And again, I think he's had a really good year with the Anaheim Ducks on a blue line where his presence has been desperately needed. Having as many kids as they have in their lineup, a guy like Gudas coming in. After that run with Florida, being willing to go to Anaheim, I think it says a lot about Gudas and the challenge he takes on going to Anaheim. For Tampa Bay, another defenseman. We're on quite the run here of defensemen, aren't we? Nick Perbix. Before Perbix came up for Tampa Bay, no idea what Perbix might be able to do or that he'd be able to stick around. Tampa Bay has this, though, where we look at their prospect pool and we think, there's not really a whole lot there. But they're able to develop guys at the AHL level who can come in and help at the NHL level. The plans all the way through for Tampa Bay have always seemingly included, and we need to have that player development. There have been examples of teams that when they're at the top of the league, player development might be less important. It never feels like it's that far from front of mind for Tampa. It may very well be, in part because the salary cap has pruned their numbers over the last few years, and so you kind of have to have guys on cheap contracts that can come up and play. And Perbix, I think, has been quite good, considering there was no hype around Perbix that I saw before he came up. For Toronto, Toronto's difficult. Toronto's difficult because we cover Toronto a lot, right? But I'm going to say this. After hearing a recent roundtable discussion I did on TV regarding Timothy Liljegren, and, well, if you got to trade Liljegren, you got to trade Liljegren. I think he is what he is, and they can replace him. I think Liljegren's been really good. I'm not sure why the idea is out there that Liljegren, if they trade him, that's fine, as long as they beef up some other part of the lineup. Like, I think trading Sandin was baffling enough. If they traded Liljegren, I would really find that to be a head-scratcher, because I think he's a good defenseman. And I think he's a good young defenseman, and there aren't a ton of those around. Now, in a recent game for Toronto, I don't know if this was the case last night, or may have been last night, where they were all left-handed defensemen. That's problematic, not having a right-hand defenseman, but I wouldn't trade Liljegren to make that work. I wouldn't. Personally, I would not be wanting to trade a good young defenseman, and I do think Liljegren at this point is somewhat underrated, which is, from a Toronto perspective, underrating defensemen is nothing new. I remember all the way back to the 80s when certain defensemen would get underrated as well. Carolina, another defenseman. Look at that. I had no idea I was writing down so many defensemen. I'm going with Brent Burns. Brent Burns is having a very good year. And not only that, but since arriving in Carolina, it just feels like it's refreshed his career. So Erik Karlsson had a great year last year, I think in part because Burns was moved. So instead of splitting the time between Burns and Karlsson, Karlsson got all of it in the key situations. But Burns in Carolina has just been, I don't know if the word revelation, if I talk about a player being a revelation, gets used too often, but yeah, he fits right in. He's fit right in from game one. And he looks like he could go for years. He could be around for a lot longer. And I think Carolina's helped extend his career. In part, too, because he's not going to get used as much by Carolina as he would have been by San Jose. So I think that might add some time to his career, too. New York Islanders. Another defenseman. Man. So many defensemen. But I can explain why Noah Dobson, I feel at this point, is underrated. He has scored above a point per game for a team that is not known for being offensively gifted. If Noah Dobson was playing for a team that had, a much better scoring record, I think Dobson would be up there with Quinn Hughes in points. He's very talented. He's a great passer. He's only got the 7 goals. I feel like he could have more, but he prefers to pass, and it seems to work for him. He's got 60 points. I'll be interested to see when we get to award season in June whether or not Noah Dobson gets actual consideration for the Norris. I think he should. I think he should absolutely be in the top five. Sound right about right for Islander fans. But yeah, Dobson's been fantastic. So how many defensemen is that in a row? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 7, and 8 in this row out of 10. All right, we'll move over to Boston. It is not a defenseman from Boston. So when the Boston Bruins lost Bergeron and Krejci in the offseason to retirement, a lot of focus on down the middle, and I still focus on their depth down the middle. Charlie Coyle's been fantastic. Coyle and Zacha both have been quite good, but I think Coyle's been the better of the two. And at this point, I would say, yeah, he's probably underrated. He's already at 20 goals. He's at, I think, 48 points. So he could end up around 60 points. I think he's been really good. Now, the question could come in about whether or not Boston are a legit Stanley Cup contender at this point in the season. I think there's valid concern out there about that. However, I think Charlie Coyle's been very good down the middle for Boston. So they're not all defensemen on this list. Columbus, also not a defenseman. Now, Columbus, a bit of a challenge because I do feel like they don't get as much attention as they should. So there's a number of players I could have put down as underrated, but I'm going with Dmitry Voronkov. Voronkov is kind of the engine that keeps that line going with Chinakhov and Marchenko. And I feel like Voronkov is being overlooked a little bit this year. I think because he plays in Columbus. I think that whole line's been really good. The offensive numbers haven't been fantastic, but that's kind of, I think, part of playing in Columbus too this year. It's just, I think next year could be a real turnaround for them, and Voronkov could be a huge part of that. His numbers won't wow you, but his work ethic's really good. He's really strong out there, and that line is good at driving the play. So, yeah, Columbus has themselves quite the line there. It's about trying to build out everything else too. But, yeah, I think there's hope. For Las Vegas, Vegas would be difficult, except there's one name. So what's interesting is, last summer when I was rating the top goalies in the NHL, I did not put Adin Hill in my top 10. I felt like, okay, he had a really good run in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but we have never seen him as a starter in the NHL. I don't know how he's going to handle that role. But this year he's been really good. Now, he did have an injury issue, of course. Kept him out for quite a while, and he had a setback. But his numbers have been great. So when I was looking at, who the top goalies were in a recent, I think it was ESPN article, and Adin Hill wasn't in there, and right away it was, well, he got hurt. And I was thinking, well, yeah, but he's been great when he's been in the lineup. He's been easily, I think, the most impressive goaltender. Him and Markstrom both putting up incredible numbers, and overall, I think that both kind of get overlooked. So I do have Connor Zary for the Flames, but yeah, Markstrom should get an honorable mention there. And Adin Hill's been excellent. So yeah, when I do the top 10 goalies this summer, Adin Hill should be in that list. If Adin Hill's not in that list, it means something bad's happened between now and when I do the list this summer. So he'd have to fall apart down the stretch and have a really rough playoff. But yeah, between the playoffs last year and this year he's been playing, I think he's underrated now. I do. Because when people talk about best goalies in the league, I don't really hear him get mentioned. Winnipeg. So Winnipeg, going back to the blue line. What a season Dylan DeMello's having. Just incredible season for Dylan DeMello. We'll see if he can follow this up with a season like that next year. Winnipeg's blue line has been excellent. So we talked about for months there about how they weren't allowing goals. That 3 goals or less allowed. They had that ridiculous run of 33, 34 games. And Dylan DeMello is a big part of that. He's a fantastic defensive defenseman. You're not going to get a lot of goals from DeMello at any point in time, but yeah, I think he's had the underrated season as well for the Winnipeg Jets, a team that sits not too far out of first in the West. And if you look by points percentage, they have every right to look at that and say, you know what, we can catch and pass Vancouver and be the best team in the West going to the playoffs. And DeMello's going to be a reason why that's happened. For Ottawa, not a defenseman for Ottawa either. So the Ottawa Senators recently, their game has really picked up. Their record's been better. Now, they've lost back-to-back games before this video, but Shane Pinto, I think, has been a huge part of the resurgence of the Ottawa Senators. Really, really impressive run by Shane Pinto. And I mean, a couple of years ago, I was thinking he's going to be a third line center in the NHL. I will revise that and say, yeah, second line center in the NHL, absolutely. He has that ability. It is a shame about the suspension for that first half of the season, because if Pinto had played the whole year for Ottawa, how many more wins would they have? And how much closer to the playoffs would they be? I'm not saying they'd be in the playoffs, but they might be more in the conversation. And yeah, Pinto, I think, has been a huge part of a pretty strong run by Ottawa lately, which, again, because it's Ottawa, it always seems to come a little too late in the season. So, which kind of sucks. LA. This won't surprise people that much, because if you're an LA fan, you're like, well, it's either Mikey Anderson or Matt Roy. I'm going with Matt Roy. I thought about Mikey Anderson, but I'm going with Matt Roy. I have said for years that LA's blue line is underrated. I'm here saying it again. They have a very strong, it's not a superstar laden blue line. I mean, obviously you have Drew Doughty there, but yeah, Roy is just, he's so good at what he does. It feels like every game, Matt Roy and Mikey Anderson. Yep. I might be the head of the Mikey Anderson Appreciation Society, but Matt Roy's a really good defenseman. I'm impressed with him. If the Kings were ever to make him available, I would hope that a team I cheer for would jump on his availability and pick him up. He'd be great in Vancouver. He'd be great in Boston. He'd be great in Dallas. Just throwing that out there. I would appreciate Matt Roy. And again, I know that that might seem like an odd pick, but I would think about Byfield, but I don't think Byfield's underrated after that goal he had the other night. Yeah, I think people know just how good he can be. Dallas, not a defenseman. So when they signed Mason Marchment, I was concerned a bit about the cost, but this year Marchment honestly has been excellent. The Dallas Stars, they've had some nice resurgence from Tyler Sagan's play as well, which may help Marchment, may just have that trickle-down effect. Marchment's been really good, though. His overall numbers are strong, and when we talk about Dallas, there's a lot of attention for Hintz, a lot of attention for Robertson, obviously for the ageless Pavelski. Everybody will watch what Jamie Benn's doing out there, but meanwhile, Marchment's putting up good offensive numbers. His defensive stats have been solid. No reason to overlook Marchment if you're a Dallas fan this year. For Colorado, also not a defenseman. So I had a run of defensemen there. That's what that is. But for Colorado, Logan O'Connor. Logan O'Connor has been an energy guy, a player who plays in the bottom six. He has the talent, though, that if he has to fill in the top six, he absolutely can. And his numbers for Colorado this year have been quite good. So, and honorable mention to Drew O'Connor for Pittsburgh, too, while we're at it. If your last name's O'Connor, you're probably an underrated player in the National Hockey League. And, Logan O'Connor for me is that with Colorado. Colorado's one of those teams that it's tough because they do get a lot of attention. And I thought about Devon Toews, and I thought, now with the contract he has and how much people talk about Devon Toews, I can't really put him on the board. So I'm going with Logan O'Connor. If you are of the mind that Devon Toews is still vastly underrated, then you can put him on your board. Just send the picture. All right. For Edmonton, back to the blue line with Edmonton. Now, again, if you've watched my channel for years on end, you know I am a huge fan of Matthias Ekholm. I think that the Oilers' blue line, also underrated. Their defensive numbers this year, after that really bad start, their defensive numbers have been good, and I feel like Ekholm has just fit in with Edmonton from shift one last year right until now. If the Oilers are going to win a Stanley Cup, it's going to be off of the hard work of guys like Ekholm. Nurse has been quite good as well. I almost would put Nurse in this category now because people have been so focused on his contract. Now, he's not living up to his contract for so long that Nurse is now having a good season, and I don't hear a lot of praise for Darnell Nurse. But I'll go ahead and throw Matthias Ekholm's name out there. He's been quite good. Philadelphia. So this is part of what inspired this list today. Nick Seeler. So there's rumors out there that Nick Seeler and the Philadelphia Flyers are working on a multi-year extension. And it was in the $2.5 to $3 million a year range. And Seeler's camp, so his agent and whatnot, feel that he can get more than that. And I thought, is Sealer really having that good year? And I dug into it when I was watching the game last night. I paid more attention to Sealer than I normally do. I've been dramatically underrating the season that Nick Sealer's had, leading the league in shot blocks and just really smart play defensively for the Philadelphia Flyers. So, yeah, Nick Sealer, I know I've been underrating him because of previous seasons and all. Maybe he's having a career year, or maybe, again, maybe I've been underrating Nick Sealer for years, but that needs to come to a stop. So here we are with the 32-team video, and there's Nick Sealer. So while everybody's, I think, underrating the Philadelphia Flyers, I've been underrating Nick Sealer, and I'd like to apologize. And I will remedy that. All right, for New Jersey was hard. New Jersey's difficult because it feels like the whole team has been a step below what was expected of them this year. But with the season they're having, and again, it's not easy to find somebody that I feel like is underrated. But I do feel like Nico Hischier's kind of underrated because everybody pays attention to Jack Hughes. Tyler Toffoli's the goal scorer on that team, like the big goal scorer, 25 goals so far this year. But Hischier just plays a really strong two-way game. He's a good player in every game. He's good in every facet, and it feels like, with Nico Hischier, it reminds me of William Karlsson in Vegas, who could absolutely be an honorable mention for Vegas, that sometimes he's just so good, people just take it for granted, that he goes out and makes really good plays, and you go, yeah, well, of course he did. But yeah, I think Hischier at this point is an underrated player. For the New Jersey Devils, which brings me to Barkov is not the player I picked for the Florida Panthers. So just go ahead and throw your hate. Everybody has Barkov in every underrated list all the time, everywhere. So means we all know he's very, very good. All right, Detroit. For Detroit, not a defenseman. So coming into this season, they had Alex Lyon, they had Ville Husso, they had James Reimer. And Alex Lyon was the number 3 guy. And I think that was pretty clear that he was, going to be the number 3 guy. And then Husso had his struggles. He's had injuries. Reimer's had his struggles as well. Lyon has not. Alex Lyon's been fantastic for Detroit. If the playoffs started tomorrow, he would be their starter. And he would, I think, perform better this year in the playoffs than he did last year in the playoffs with Florida. Not that he was bad, but I think this year he's better than he was last year. At least that's my opinion when it comes to Alex Lyon. And I do think he's an underrated player at this stage. For the New York Rangers, I think I can stop saying not a defenseman now. Vinny Trocheck. I don't know anybody that calls him Vincent Trocheck, but that's his name technically. But Vinny Trocheck. Trocheck's had a remarkable season for the New York Rangers. When they were struggling a couple weeks ago, so was Trocheck. Trocheck gets this game together. They're winning games again. So they win 10 in a row, in large part because their face-offs are very good. Trocheck's a big part of that. Trocheck is a huge part of the success the New York Rangers have had this season. And I don't feel like he's had the attention or the adoration of the fans and the media that I think he's earned. So he's on the board today. San Jose was difficult. I'm just going to say San Jose was difficult because finding a player that I think is underrated in San Jose. But there was a waiver wire pickup they made from the New York Rangers. And so I'll talk about him because I think he's been quite good. I'm honestly kind of surprised. Okay, when Ty Emberson was picked up on waivers by San Jose, I found that kind of a head scratcher. I hadn't really seen enough of Emberson's game to think that, San Jose picking him up would make a lot of sense, considering some of the other waiver wire defensemen they didn't take. But Emberson fits in San Jose. It has been a rough, long year for the San Jose Sharks. But I do think Emberson's earned the right to be a part of that blue line for years to come. I think he's been quite good for the San Jose Sharks. On a blue line that has not been good, I think Emberson's been solid. And, I mean, on some level, Kalen Addison gets an honorable mention. He's done the role with San Jose that he was brought in for. He's been that offensive defenseman. Defensively, he's suspect. We knew that from his time in Minnesota. But I mean, Emberson's the guy I'm talking about here, and I think he's had a really good year, and I would put him ahead of Addison in terms of underrated players on the San Jose Sharks. Nashville, so Nashville, I'm going to go with a player who he has been so impressive this year. He's having the best season he's ever had in the National Hockey League, and that's Michael McCarron. I've talked before about players who are drafted in the first round and reinvent themselves, change their game so that they become NHLers. McCarron's done that. McCarron was seen as a bust at the NHL level. He has played a lot of NHL games, though, for a bust, and I think he's refined his game in Nashville nicely. He can drop the gloves if he needs to. He gives a good energy game, and he started putting the puck in the net, too. Sure, it may not be at a level that you would expect of a first-rounder, but yeah, McCarron's been really good for a Nashville team that is surging. He is a huge part of that surge. A lot of attitude from these Nashville players, and when Nashville's got a lot of attitude in their lineup, they're generally winning more games than they're losing. Arizona. It is tough to find a player in Arizona that I feel like is underrated. So I'm going to go with an old favorite, and that's Lawson Crouse. Lawson Crouse has 20 goals this year. If Lawson Crouse let's say he played for the Rangers, he'd be a mega star. Huge player, plays a physical game, plays a smart game. He can put the puck in the net. And I don't really know what else to say other than I think he's one of the better power forwards in the game right now. And because he plays in Arizona, he's not going to get that level of attention. And I think that the 20 goals he has in Arizona, if he was playing for a Rangers, playing for Vegas, or say Boston, Lawson Crouse would be honestly a prototypical Boston Bruins forward if he was there. But I think he'd have more goals if he was playing for a team that wasn't necessarily Arizona. For the Coyotes lately, it's been a really rough go, that 13-game losing streak. Crouse is also one of the guys who hasn't been producing, but I still think Crouse is underrated. Florida. So if it's not going to be Barkov, who's it going to be? Well, going with a blue liner for this one. I think his playlist this year has been absolutely insane. That's Gustav Forsling. Defensively, offensively, Forsling gives you kind of a little bit of everything. This is a team that was expected to maybe struggle out of the gate. You might have a Stanley Cup hangover. You don't have Ekblad. You don't have Montour. Guys like Forsling and OEL, they held down the fort until those guys came back. And I think Forsling's been absolutely fantastic for Florida. A big part of the reason that they are sitting at the top of the power rankings is a guy like Gustav Forsling and what he's been able to do for them. Florida's pro scouts are just phenomenal. Being able to find exactly the right guys at the right time. It just seems like that's part of what's helped make Florida kind of a bit of a wagon this year in the National Hockey League. Chicago. It is not easy to find a player that I feel is underrated in Chicago. So I'm going with a guy I've talked about before, and that's Peter Mrazek. Because there are still people who think, well, Mrazek's not very good. So his numbers in Chicago are excellent considering the blue line he's behind, considering that Chicago's been the worst team in the National Hockey League over the last few months. Goaltending's not really been a problem. Mrazek's been better than Soderblom, but it's not Soderblom's been bad. Mrazek's been excellent. Honestly, if you were going by merit for who should be in the All-Star game this year, I think Mrazek would have been the pick for Chicago. Obviously, Bedard's going to be the pick because he's the star player and he was getting around a point per game, but I think Mrazek has been absolutely stellar. So not as an insult to Bedard, but more as a compliment to Mrazek. I think he would have been the best pick for the All-Star game. For Seattle. Seattle, I think I've had this player's name on the board before when I've talked about underrated. I'm going to go with Adam Larsson again. I knew it was going to be a defenseman for Seattle. I'm going with Larsson. I think Larsson's playing the best hockey right now in Seattle that he has in his entire career. That's last year and this year, I think, with Seattle have been the best seasons of Larsson's career. It took him a while. When he was drafted by the New Jersey Devils, it took a while for him to develop. Obviously, we all remember the Hall trade to Edmonton and how everybody was like, Edmonton's getting fleeced. And, I think Larsson was pretty solid in Edmonton, and now he's been really, really good with Seattle. He's one of those defensemen that gets better with age. And I think right now he's playing exactly how it was expected when he was drafted 4th overall, way, way, way back when. Buffalo. Oh, sure. Start writing the full names. And save this one for last. So many double letters. I'll spell it right this time. The W and the double K. It's frustrating, but it has to be Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Last I saw, he has the best save percentage. I think the best goals against average as well since January the 1st. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. The Buffalo Sabres are not in the hunt for a playoff spot at all, but the only reason that they got to 500 before last night's loss to Florida is UPL. Luukkonen's been absolutely lights out. This is a team that clearly Levi and Luukkonen are going to be the tandem. Levi's seen as like the bright shining star, but don't look now. Luukkonen looks like he's going to be a starting goaltender in the NHL. It'll be fascinating to see what Buffalo does this summer. So if Luukkonen and Levi are both going to be your guys, do you go with 50-50 next year for starts? Or if Luukkonen's got really high trade value, and if there's teams looking for goaltending help, and if you really believe in Levi as being a starter next year, you might be able to get a really good haul for Luukkonen. But either way, if they keep or whatever they do, Luukkonen this year has been absolutely fantastic. His numbers, again, really, really good. And so Buffalo does not have a lot of silver linings. I think the play of UPL has been a silver lining for them this year. For Washington, currently injured, but I think he's having the best season of his career, and that's Nick Dowd. Nick Dowd, best season of his career. And while I'm mentioning Nick Dowd, I'll also mention Nick Roy with the Vegas Golden Knights. Defensively minded forwards who are a little better offensively than I think they're given credit for. Roy's had a really good year for Vegas, and I think Dowd's had a good year for Washington. It's a shame about the injury, but Dowd's a guy that I kind of felt like didn't quite get a fair shake with Vancouver when they were rotating guys in and out of that fourth line. I thought way too often, rather than being patient and letting guys, get that chemistry. And so I'm glad to see Dowd playing well for Washington. And I do feel like at this point in time he's underrated. But you guys can let me know your thoughts. Which brings us to Vancouver. This one's going to throw people off, but I'm going to explain it. Don't worry, I'll explain it. JT Miller. Why? Miller's the number one scoring player in the Vancouver Canucks right now. I think Miller's the heart and soul of that team up front. He wears his heart on his sleeve, which means he curses and swears during games like a sailor. I can tell when he's swearing, because if there's loud swearing and he's on the ice, it's him. And some people don't like it. Some people don't like his temperament. I think his temperament's great. I think it means that when the team's not playing well, he's going to tell you. And he's going to make it pretty obvious on the ice and off the ice that that's not acceptable. I think that Miller, being cranky and grumpy as often as he is, I think it's good for the Canucks. And I think, like last night, he was openly frustrated with the fact he had a really good game and the team lost. And that's what you want. You don't want players that are like, we'll get him again next time. Miller is, I think, the best forward the Vancouver Canucks have. Right now, he's the best forward they have. And I'm including EP40 in that conversation. So you guys can give me your hate in the comment section below. And I don't mean that 5 years from now, Miller's going to be ahead of Pettersson. I think clearly 5 years from now, Pettersson's still going to be one of the top forwards in the game. I think Miller at that point obviously would be dropping off. But when the Canucks picked up Miller in a trade, I saw all these comments about he's not worth a first rounder. What are the Canucks thinking? This is stupid. When they re-signed him, everybody, that contract's terrible. And sure, at the end of it, it may be a bad contract, but who cares about the end of a contract? It's the fact that you're trying to keep the team competitive. And Miller, picking between Miller and Horvat, I would have picked Horvat. I would have picked wrong. Miller's the better of the two players. So I do think Miller has been underrated and continues to kind of be underrated. The other thing I want to say with Miller, his defensive game's been really good this year. Comparatively speaking, like last year, how many times did I talk about turnovers? How many times did Canuck fans talk about turnovers? This year, he's been much, much better with and without the puck. So I think Miller at this point is underrated. Not underpaid, but definitely I think underrated. Let me know why I'm wrong in the comments section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.